Welcome, everybody. We are going to transition to the panel presentation. The link to the full video is still available through LexMedia. We wanted to save time. It is a long movie. It's over an hour and a half, I believe, and we really appreciate all of you joining us for this important conversation tonight. My name is Julie Fenn. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Assistant Coordinator of PE Health and Wellness Department for the Lexington Public Schools. I'm also the co-chair, along with Larry Freeman, a member of our community, for the School Health Advisory Council that we refer to as SHAC, S-H-A-C. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education requires that all school districts have a dedicated School Health Advisory Council. We are a very vibrant council. The advisory group is appointed by the school district, and it's a collaborative effort of the Lexington schools, students, families, town and community organizations, and we address the health and academic success through a coordinated, comprehensive approach. And the success of the council is really founded on the strong collaboration and working partnerships between the community and school district. At the end, I'll share contact information if you're interested in joining SHAC and participating in our 4 meetings a year and in any of our subcommittees. Just very briefly, some of the initiatives and subcommittees of SHAC include our annual Parent Academy, which provides workshops for parents and families in the community. And it is 1 full day of workshops. We have yearly parent forums. We have some task force, including the LGBTQ task force, who is co-hosting and taking the lead on hosting for tonight's event. We also have our wellness policy committee for the district, a substance abuse committee, and a newly formed relationship violence prevention task force. We do really work hard to take on important advocacy role within the school and the community around issues related to the health and well-being of youth and families, including an initiative over the last 2 years of providing gender-inclusive health education lessons. And you can find out more about that when I give the contact at the end. I just really quickly want to thank LexMedia for partnering with us on this new venture as we continue to navigate our new way of coming together during these unprecedented times. And as you can see, if you were on at the beginning, we can't plan for some of the technology glitches, even through our technology, all the technology and expertise that we have tonight. I want to extend much gratitude and thanks to our moderator, Jason Wheeler, our panel, Kelly Jenkins, Johnny Cole, Noah Stang Osborne, and Danny Overton, and I know they'll be introducing themselves and telling you a little bit about who they are. I also want to thank our co-sponsors for tonight, the LPS Office of Equity and Student Support, the LHS Gender and Sexuality Alliance, the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and their Safe Schools Initiative for LGBTQIA students, the Town of Lexington Human Services Department, and Lex Pride. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Deb Zucker for all of her behind the scenes work that she has done to make a lot of things happen that people don't know she's behind. I do want to say that it is difficult to discuss the challenges that those that identify within the LGBTQ community experience without acknowledging the horrific, racially motivated events facing our Black and African American friends, neighbors, and families, including our LGBTQ people of color. We must do more than speak up. We must act on eliminating discriminatory practices that harm youth, our families, and our community, and our nation. We can't just educate ourselves. And this is a start tonight for all of us attending, but we have to listen to what the needs and the actions are that will eliminate discriminatory based practices. Why are events like tonight important? I just want to say that when individuals or groups do not fit established norms, whether that be gender norms, racial norms, or any other norms within our society, they often face stigma, discriminatory practices, or social exclusion. And all of these adversely impact the health and well-being of our youth and our families and our community. I just really quickly want to share our 2019 Youth Risk Behavior Survey completed by LHS students. And I want to talk about the disparities for our LGBTQ plus students. They were more likely to report being verbally threatened at school than our non-LGBTQ students, more likely reported being bullied at school, being bullied electronically, feeling hopeless or depressed, feelings of suicide ideation than our non-LGBTQ students, and also a greater risk of having had sexual contact with someone against their will. It's important to note that LGBTQ youth are not predisposed to these conditions or issues. There have been several studies published that say that the rates are nearly eliminated in communities where the environment is inclusive. And that's really our goal, is to work towards being a more inclusive, respectful, kind, and understanding community. With that being said, Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you as our moderator, and thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Julie. Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy that you all are joining us tonight. Once again, my name is Jason Wheeler. I use he and him for pronouns, and I am just delighted to spend the evening moderating this panel. I'm honored to be joined by a group of spectacular individuals who will, in a moment, introduce themselves and share a little bit about their experience, their identity, the work that they're doing, all the ways that they are creating change in our communities. I want to take a moment before the panel introduces themselves to first thank all of those folks who came together to make this event happen, right? Julie named all of those folks. I will not do that again, but I think that it's really important, again, just to sort of recognize that there was a whole host of people who came together to ensure that we are spending time focusing in on topics related to gender identity, sexual orientation, gender expression, right? We know that events like this both raise awareness and specifically amplify the experiences and the voices of our trans and gender nonconforming community members, friends, family, loved ones. And so for that, I'm grateful. In my particular role, as Julie said, I'm a consultant with the Safe Schools program for LGBTQ students. This is a program that is a collaborative effort between the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the Massachusetts Commission on LGBTQ Youth. In that particular role, I've got the privilege of being able to move across the state and work with schools that are really centering in on topics related to gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation as it relates to students and young people. Much like Lexington, there are some incredible districts out there that are doing great work. And again, I'm appreciative of that. And I'm particularly appreciative of all the work that is being done here in the district of Lexington. I also want to echo something that Julie already mentioned. I think that for me, it is really important for us to explicitly recognize that the LGBTQ community itself is not a monolithic community, right? Our identities are multifaceted, and many of our members of the LGBTQ community are experiencing discrimination based on race, sexual orientation, gender identity, and oftentimes there are people who are experiencing all three of those things simultaneously, right? And so for that, as we move into LGBTQ Pride Month, the month of June, right, it is important for us to recognize that trans and queer people of color have always and continue to play a critical role in our history as a queer movement. Right? And so I want to name that really specifically. Throughout our conversation tonight, we're going to be sure to engage in discussions about intersectionality, about the complexity of the identities that many of our community members are holding. So, as a moderator, I do feel that there are a couple of logistical things that I just need to tell you. One is we are recording our panel discussion tonight. The goal is that this is going to live on and be a tool and a resource for folks moving forward. This will sit on the Safe Schools program website through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education as a resource to people in the future. We're going to encourage you to use the Q&A feature of Zoom here tonight to be able to ask questions, and we're going to do our best to get through as many questions as we can, but we also want to recognize that we might not have time to get to everyone's question, but we're going to do our best to do so. So I hope that you all have all night to spend with us this evening, right? So with that, those are my sort of logistical housekeeping kinds of things, if you will. With that, I'm going to ask for folks who are part of our panel this evening to spend some time just introducing yourselves. At this point, sort of a brief introduction, some of the things that I'd like to make sure that you include, if you don't mind. Include your name, talk a little bit about the pronouns that you use, a little bit about your role, or whether it's you're an educator or a student, right? Talk a little bit about your role, and then tell us a bit about why this panel, right? What brought you here tonight? You know, I was saying that it could be as simple as somebody twisted your arm to be public this evening and having some conversations, or something a little bit more deep about your commitment to this particular work and what motivates you. Johnny, do you mind? I'm going to go ahead and put some folks on the spot. Johnny, do you mind if I ask you to start us off this evening?
Sure. Thanks, Jason, and thanks everyone for having me today. My name is Johnny Cole. I am the Director of Equity and Student Supports for the Lexington Public Schools. My pronouns are he, him, his, and thanks so much for all the comments about, you know, the intersectionality within the community and just referencing the continuing struggles against oppression that we're seeing across the nation. I'm excited to be a part of this tonight because I think this is a cog in the machine that will dismantle that other big bad machine. So I'm here tonight. I was asked to join and gladly joined by some of my colleagues in Lexington. I'm here to support the work in our local community and beyond. I think that particularly when looking at this panel around gender and gender identity and all that encompasses, I'm here to sort of model how even as a member of the LGBT community myself, as a gay man, I still had and have a lot of work to do around my gender privilege as a cisgender man. We're all these beautiful individuals made up of all our intersectional identities. So I'm part of the panel tonight to ideally model some of that while also conveying how adults in positions of leadership can do the work for our young people. And, you know, I say that to remind folks that, you know, you don't have to have a fancy title like I do, or work in the central office of a school district, or even work in a school district to know that you are a leader to young people. All adults are leaders to young people, even though some of those young people think we're super annoying. I have 2 middle schoolers at home, so I'm living it right now. And so that's, I think, one of the main reasons that I'm here, and I'm excited to join.
Awesome. Johnny, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Danny, do you mind if I put you on the spot to go ahead and introduce yourself as well? So again, name, pronouns, a little bit about your school, and why you're joining this panel this evening.
Sure. So my name's Danny. I use he, him, his pronouns. I identify as a transgender man. And let's see. My role kind of is, I grew up in Lexington, and I went to Lexington High School, and I was one of the co-presidents of the GSA while I was there. And I've done a lot of panels in town in kind of different areas. So I've spoken to freshman health classes at the high school, and I've done panels in front of new teachers and administrators, and I've spoken in front of elected officials. And so I really enjoy just kind of educating as many people as possible, really. That's a big way of kind of making a difference that I enjoy doing.
Yeah, Danny, thank you so much. So this is old hat for you, huh? To, be presenting and talking about your identity and all of these conversations this evening. So please know it's appreciated. Kelly, you mind if I put you on the spot?
Not at all. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Jenkins. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as a transgender woman. And I want to thank all the participants that are on here watching this right now, because I feel like outreach and voices and storytelling are the key to success. And so thank you all for being here to listen. A little bit about myself. I consider myself a public educator. I've been teaching in public schools since 2003. When I first started my teaching career, I was presenting as a male at the time. And with that came a dynamic that gave me certain leeway in a school system that I didn't know that I had at the time, certain privileges. The very next year I transitioned, and those privileges, I realized very quickly, can be taken away from you. And so I've continued my journey as an educator, and I moved to Massachusetts in 2014 because I wanted to be an open, authentic teacher. And I felt that in Tennessee, I would not be afforded that opportunity as a transgender woman. So I moved up here in 2014, and I've continued my career as a public educator. I've worked in several school systems in the state. I'm a science teacher, and I also host a TV show called Kelly's Quest, The Transnational Journey, where I go around the nation and I interview individual transgender people in each state to try to tell the story of the good that we're doing in the world, not just sitting back and saying, woe is us, but showing our community is vivacious, is out there doing things to change the world, and they're working hard at it. And I just feel like that these stories need to be shared. And I'm here tonight because I've learned that I should just say yes to the universe whenever it asks me to do something that's in line with my advocacy and my belief. So I was asked to do this opportunity, and I wasted no time saying yes, and I'm thankful to be here.
Well, and likewise, we're appreciative of you being here. Thanks, Kelly. And Noah, do you mind introducing yourself once again? Name, pronouns, school or affiliation, a little bit about your identity or why you're here this evening on this particular panel.
Okay. Hi, my name is Noah Singh Osborne. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him. I am a non-binary transmasculine person. I go to Lesley University. I'm a rising junior art therapy major, biology minor, and I am a board member of Lex Pride, which is super awesome, honestly. You should check out Lex Pride, although they are doing this event, so hopefully you know about them already. This is my third time doing this specific gender revolution panel, and I really enjoy doing this kind of work. I feel like I always meet like really cool people and I get interesting questions, and I do think it's a good video. So yeah.
Likewise. Noah, I appreciate the shout outs, right? Whenever we can do a little bit of marketing, right, around Lex Pride or Kelly's Quest, right? Any of those kinds of things, I'm all for it in these particular venues, if you will. So I'd like, if you don't mind, to have you reflect just a little bit, right? I want you to spend a little bit of time thinking back. For some of you, this could be really early on, and think a little bit about your gender, right? And more specifically, think a little bit about some of the earliest messages that you may have received about your gender, or maybe some of your earliest memories that you have with regard to your gender. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us. You are also welcome to share on behalf of either yourself or family members through this conversation as well. So I'm going to look for sort of visual cues around anyone who is interested in jumping in immediately. So Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about some of your earliest memories around gender.
Thanks, Jason. My earliest memories around gender, I like to say, I didn't know that I had quote unquote gender dysphoria until everybody in society started telling me that I wasn't a girl. Because I'm in my body, as long as I can remember, in my brain, as long as I can remember, I have always identified as a girl. And I remember in kindergarten, back in East Tennessee, when they would say, okay, kids, it's time to go to the restroom. The boys would line up on this side, the girls would line up on this side, and I would go to the girls' side. And I remember clearly being told that I need to go to the boys' side. Those little microaggressions, macroaggressions continued throughout my upbringing because I was also raised in a devout Southern Baptist evangelical family. And because of the religious ethos, the religious upbringing of my family, they used the Bible as a way to show what gender was also. Well, in the Bible, it says a man is this and a woman is this. So my family was always manipulating me to tell me that my true authentic self was incorrect. And that brought on a lot of hurt feelings. It brought on a lot of confusion that I carried with me a long time through life. I'm still not rectified with my family on this because of their Southern Baptist upbringing, but we're moving along with it. But as long as I can remember, my gender identity has been that of a woman. And it was just society using reasons to try to knock that truth out of me. You can't be a transgender woman because you play sports too well. You can't be a transgender woman because you have male genitals. On and on and on were all these little things that try to prove to me that I was not who I knew my truth to be. And eventually I couldn't overcome the truth that I am a transgender woman, and I accepted that inevitably, and thankfully I did, and here I am now living my best life because of accepting that truth.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you so much. You know, Kelly, you bring up two things that I want to make sure that this evening we talk a little bit about. And so I'm making notes here of things that I want to come back to. One, I think it's quite striking that you are able to speak about, as a young child, recognizing those unnecessary gendered practices, right? Girls over here, boys over here. It's one of the things that we talk a lot about because school systems as a whole tend to be just very gendered spaces, right? And so we often talk a lot about some of those unnecessary gendered practices. So I want to make sure that we come back to that theme or that conversation. The other thing that really strikes me about some of the things that you shared is the idea of thinking about family acceptance, right? And what does it mean to have families move along a continuum of acceptance, and what does that look like, right? And I think that oftentimes when we talk about family acceptance, there's the sort of student perspective, right? And then there's the family perspective. And I think the student or the young person perspective, if you will, right, is that I need this to happen now. I've given a lot of thought to this. I've been thinking about this. This is something that is immediate, right? And there's sometimes some forgetfulness around the fact that this might be new information to your family or your loved ones, and that we've got to think about what that process is for the family as well, while still creating an environment where this kid feels affirmed and loved and accepted and all of those things, right? So I appreciate you bringing up both of those topics, and I'm making notes to come back to them. I see that there's a hand up, so I'm not sure, I don't believe that I can unmute, but anyone able to unmute Larry to be able to comment? Larry, you should be unmuted if you'd like to jump in.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. Larry Freeman, pronouns he, him. I guess a question for the panel. I have a daughter who's in the 4th grade. And I'd say, maybe the last week before school went completely remote, I was there and the teacher divided the class into boys and girls. And I thought that was odd. I thought we had moved, past those kind of categories. But then, just this past week, remote learning, the teacher had a remote learning session for boys and then a different session for girls. I guess I want to ask the panel, when you hear those kind of things when you were in school, did it give you anxiety? Did it give other students an opportunity to, I don't know, make fun of you or try to single you out in any way?
Larry, thanks so much. I appreciate you bringing up the question. You and I are obviously on a very similar page, right, in terms of picking up on that idea of gendered practices and how they make one feel, right, or what the experience is. So Danny, do you want to jump in and quickly answer that question and then just transition into some conversation a little bit about your earliest messages as it relates to gender, if you're comfortable doing so?
Sure. So, it looks like someone in the chat is saying, please repeat the question. So, from what I understand, the question is I couldn't hear too well either, but from what I understand, the question is, so in class, kids are often split up into boys and girls, and how that had an impact on us, the panelists, and how if it gave other kids the opportunity to pick on us or anything like that. Am I understanding the question correctly? Probably, yes.
Yep,
Okay.
that's how I understood it as well, Danny. Yep.
So in terms of an answer for that, I would say I remember very clearly in biology class sophomore year, we did a unit about reproduction, and the message that I got was that boys have penises and girls have vaginas. And I was sitting there as a transgender boy who had recently come out, and I was like, no. And I just remember kind of feeling a little bit invisible. And also, I remember everyone kind of awkwardly looking at me and then looking away. And I was like, this is awkward. So yeah, mostly it no one, I don't remember anyone picking on me in that specific instance. I just remember it being terribly awkward, being taught that essentially all people are cis. So that's kind of what that question reminded me of. And then in terms of being split into boys and girls, that's just awkward in that if you're split into boys and girls, and I had just come out as this, I have two memories of this. One was before I'd come out, and I awkwardly went to the girls' side, and I didn't belong there, and everyone was a little confused as to why I was there. But if I'd gone to the boys' side, then everyone also would have been a little bit confused as I was there. So it's just kind of brings up a profound sense of not belonging. And then after I'd come out, I remember going to the boys' side and being like, yeah, and then a boy being like, why are you here? And I was like, no. So it's never fun if you're trans and the class is being split. And I would assume, I'm binary trans, so I would assume it's even more uncomfortable and horrible if you're non-binary. Yeah.
Yeah, Danny, thanks so much. I appreciate your comments. You bring up, again, this idea of unnecessary gendered practices, that we are often unnecessarily gendering the body, right? And I think that's something that we don't often think about. And one of the reasons that Julie Fenn, we are so appreciative of you, is that you are really thinking about ways to ensure that our health classes and sexuality conversations are really inclusive of the variety of bodies that exist in the world, and the experience that folks have. So know that there's a sincere appreciation here for you and the work that you're doing. The other thing I just want to do, and then Johnny, I'm going to pass it over to you, is Danny, you said a word that I just want to call out real specifically. You referred to cis people, which is a term for those who might be on the call this evening, if that's a new term to you. It's either cis or cisgender. The best way that I can explain that is to talk a little bit about myself. I identify as a cis man. What that means is that when I was born, the doctor held me up like Simba and said, "Congratulations, you have a boy." And I think of myself as a man. That makes me cisgender, right? It's when you're sex assigned at birth and the way that you think about yourself and who you know yourself to be is aligned or similar, right? Or the same. The opposite of cisgender would be transgender. Okay. Johnny, do you mind jumping in, talking a little bit about some of your earliest memories here too?
Yeah, and I also just in response to the question that Larry shared, that asked, is just to make sure that folks understand that it is that the gendering that happens in schools and in all our spaces affects all kids. I can share that as a young gay man, before I even realized I was gay, that there were aspects of myself that I learned very early were things that I shouldn't feel. So when I grew up in the 80s, and there was this great half-hour TV every morning where it was like 15 minutes of My Little Pony and 15 minutes of G.I. Joe. I loved them equally. Like, they both were amazing. and I knew very early on that, like, I shouldn't talk about how much I love My Little Pony, but it was okay for me to talk about how much I love G.I. Joe. And so when we are in those spaces where we're gendering kids, particularly into the sort of binary understanding of gender, we're impacting all kids. My son is just turned 12. And for a long time, he just danced and he played soccer. And he was one of gazillions of boys playing soccer. He was for many years the only boy in the dance company that he was dancing with. And I think that we have to recognize the ways in which all kids are impacted by this. There's this professional learning exercise that I've done, and some of the folks have probably done with educators in particular. And you sort of draw a box and what are the things that keep boys in the boy box and girls in the girl box, right? And then what are the names and the terms that we refer to these people once they step out of that box? And we're not going to say them tonight, but most of you can probably articulate that they're really nasty and awful and horrible. And it happens when a boy talks about loving My Little Pony or goes to dance in ballet. It happens when a young person who identifies as a girl doesn't like wearing dresses, right? Like, so the impact is negative, I think, on all kids, and it's especially difficult for our trans and non-binary kids. So I just want to make sure that is clear for everybody. This is work for all of us.
Yeah, Johnny, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Noah, I want to jump into the conversation here and maybe talk a little bit about some of your earliest memories related to gender, and or piggyback on that conversation if that's what you were going to do.
I was going to talk about my earliest memories about gender. This is not my memory. Well, this is a mix of my memory and my mom's memory. Apparently, when I was in early elementary school, I found out that I was going to develop breasts when I was older. And that was just a really distressing thought for me. And I went through all these methods that I could avoid having breasts. I asked my mom, I was like, if I starve myself, if I never eat, will I just not develop breasts? And she was like, well, you might still develop breasts. And I was like, damn it. And I was like, what if I cut them off? And she was like, you would die. False. I'm getting top surgery. It's going to work out. But it wasn't, I didn't bring it up in terms of top surgery. I brought it up in terms of like a 7-year-old with a knife, which was obviously a bad idea. But I think that was like the first time that she wondered if I might be transgender. But at the time, I didn't wonder if I was transgender. I didn't really know transgender people, and I definitely didn't know the concept of non-binary. So I didn't quite have the language to be like, I'm not a girl. And I didn't come out as transgender until I was 16. And it was not safe for me to come out as transgender for a while. My biological father was transphobic, among other things, and it would have been extremely unsafe for me to come out before he lost custody of me at the age of 14. So I didn't even really think about it, because it would have been more painful for me to acknowledge to myself that I wasn't a girl, but then also have to hide it from the world. So that is my early memories about being trans.
Thanks. Noah, can I put you on the spot? First, congratulations on your upcoming top surgery. That's huge. Second, wondering if you can talk a little bit about non-binary experiences, right? Or just the idea of being non-binary and sort of what does that mean to you?
Sure. So non-binary is an umbrella term that just means that you're not male or female. I know a lot of people describe gender as like a spectrum, like if male's over here and female's over here, then non-binary must be somewhere in the middle. I don't quite think of it like that. The first time I came out as trans, I marked my gender on an XY axis, which made sense to me at the time. And now my brain is not working, which is X or which is Y, but that's fine. Anyway, it was like male to female on the bottom, and then like how strongly I felt the gender. So like agender being at the top, and then at the bottom was like how strongly I identified with that. And that worked for a little bit. I think one analogy that I think works really well is like gender is a spectrum, but it's not from like male to female. If male is blue and female's pink for some reason, it's all the colors. So you don't have to be purple. You could be like green or like orange or something. And that's how I feel about my gender. I do use he, him pronouns. I don't identify as a man though, and I definitely do not identify as a woman at all. So that is how non-binary is for me. And it took me a very long time to find the language for it, because it wasn't like I took health classes too. And I'll tell you, my brother took a health class, and after he knew I was trans, he was like, hey, we're talking about LGBTQ stuff. What about transgender people? And his health teacher told him to his face, word for word, transgender people don't matter. And then he came home and told me that. And I was like, oh, interesting. That was not a very long time ago. That was years ago. So I'm hoping things have improved by now, but I definitely wasn't introduced to the concept at school. And I don't think there would have been anyone in my life to introduce me to it until I met actual non-binary people.
Yeah. Yeah, what you're describing isn't an uncommon experience for lots of folks to say that I just never had role models or people in my life who held some of these identities. Therefore, I didn't have the language to talk about my own identity, right, as a young person. I also will say that I'm really sorry that you and your brother both had that experience when you're in school. And I would highlight that now we are celebrating the fact that there are, in fact, 3 gender markers in the public school system here in Massachusetts, right? Students can be enrolled in Lexington Public Schools utilizing a gender marker of M for male, F for female, and N for non-binary. And the way that I simply describe that is that the folks who are using the non-binary gender marker are simply saying, M and F don't work for me. And that's all they're saying, right? Because we don't have the luxury of having somebody like Noah who's here explaining to us what that means to them, right? So when somebody's using that N gender marker, it is simply saying M and F don't work for me. And that's it, right? I wonder if folks wouldn't mind jumping in a little bit and talking a little bit about, so given the complexities of your gender, right, the way that you think about your gender, how did that develop over time? How did that sort of shift for you? And part of the reason that I'm asking this question is that we often will hear, particularly when young people transition gender, this idea of it's a phase, or how do they know, or right, any of those kinds of things. And we forget that people's identities shift and evolve all the time, right, and over time. And so I'm just sort of throwing out the question to you all, and again, looking for anybody who wants to jump in to talk a little bit about that evolution of gender for you. Sort of what did that, how did that develop over time? Danny, go ahead and jump in.
Sure. So I think that for as long as I can remember, I've known, before I came out, I knew that something wasn't right. And as a little kid, it didn't matter as much because when you're really young, there's not as much focus on gender. But as you get older, I feel like things get more gendered in my experience. And so when I was really young, I would just play in the sandbox with whoever was in the sandbox, and that was fine. But then as I got older, and puberty started happening, that's kind of when cliques in school started forming, and I thought I was a girl, and so I was friends with a few girls, and I learned what the word transgender meant, I think, when I was in 5th grade maybe, and I was like, oh, that's great, but that couldn't possibly be me because I'm definitely a girl. Yeah, sure, definitely very much girl. But I was also deeply dissatisfied. So I remember getting my hair cut shorter, and I looked kind of like a blonde Dora, and I cried because I looked like Dora. And so my mom gave me a bowl cut, and I was like, yes! And I started getting mistaken for a boy, and I was like, this is great, but I'm definitely a girl. So it took a while. It took me going to high school and making new friends, and finally being like, maybe I'm not a girl, and just kind of very slowly coming to terms with that. And I thought, okay, I don't think I'm a girl. Maybe I'm non-binary. And so I asked a few people to use they, them pronouns for me, but it still didn't feel right to me. And I eventually came to the conclusion that I was a man. And then I came out publicly the first day of my sophomore year of high school, and I suddenly saw a future for myself and was really happy for the first time in a really long time. And so things worked out in the end, and I'm very happy about it.
Beautiful. Thanks, Danny. Thanks for talking a little bit about that path. Do you mind if I latch on to one thing that you shared for a moment? Could you speak a little bit to, you said something to the effect of, I waited till high school and I developed a sort of new set of friends. Can you speak a little bit about your peer relationships, about sort of friendships, and what did that look like during this process of transition for you?
Sure. So in elementary and middle school, my friends were not that great for a multitude of reasons. But one of them was I got the feeling that if I wasn't like them, that they wouldn't want to be my friend anymore. So I think that was a really big part of me kind of denying the fact that I'm a man. It was just, I felt that I couldn't come out or be anything but a girl because I felt that I would be rejected by my peers. And because for me, it wasn't a family thing. I'm really lucky in that my parents are supportive, and they're actually both gay, so that probably helps a lot. So it was very much a friends thing for me. That was a barrier. And then in high school, the people who I went to middle school with, I wasn't in the public school system up until high school. So it was a whole new crowd of peers, and I just kind of got the opportunity to change things, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, share your own narrative, right, at that point, and that was probably really important for you. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? Noah, yeah, do you mind jumping in, talking a little bit about your sort of how your gender has either evolved or for you shifted over time, and sort of what does that experience look like, or what did it look like?
Yeah, so for both my gender and sexuality, I started out as a really enthusiastic ally. Like I was like, oh, you know, I'm straight, but like gay rights, you know, and I'll go to all these gay things, but as an ally, which didn't work out super well before I was out, because I told my bio dad, I was like, oh, can I go to the event? It says it's for LGBT people and allies. I'm an ally. And he was like, no, what if people think you're gay? And I was like, oh yeah, wouldn't want that to happen. Definitely, I'm not looking for a girl right now. Nope. So pushed me back in the closet a little more then. But when I came out as non-binary, it was a lot of little baby steps for me. So I was like, I'm not a girl, but how safe is it for me to say that I'm not a girl? So I did tell my mom, I was like, hey, just so you know, heads up, might not be a girl. We'll see if this comes up again. And she was like, okay. I was like, okay. But I started using they and she pronouns when I was in like specifically queer spaces. And then I was like, okay, this is working out mostly. She's not the vibe. So I stopped using she pronouns and I started using sie, zim, zir pronouns, which are a form of neopronouns. Neopronouns are pronouns other than they, he, and she. I forgot binary pronouns for a second. And I used neopronouns because I felt very like not connected to the ideal of male or female, and I didn't want to be like, I'm right in the middle. But most people refuse to use neopronouns or think you're like a fake transgender person for using them. So I slowly phased them out and I started using they and he, and I'm still using they and he right now. So yeah, and I've considered my gender a journey. So I don't really know where I'll end up in the future, but I'm okay with that. And also to speak to the point of phases, I don't think something being a phase is necessarily a bad thing. Like we let our kids have Batman phases and we let them do all of this other stuff. So why would it be bad if we supported them through other phases of their life? I was reading something and it was like, okay, sure. So your kid says you're trans. What if they decide they aren't in a year? Well, if you're not supportive and they're not trans, they're still going to remember that your love is conditional. They're going to know that you'll only love them if they follow your rules. It doesn't matter if they're trans or not. That's going to affect your child. So regardless of whether you think it might be a phase, you should support your kid. And in addition to other people in your life, not just your kid. But that's where my gender is right now.
Yeah, thanks so much. And anyone else want to jump in on this one? Kelly, yeah, go right ahead.
It's more of a thought. My gender quest, my gender journey has taken place. I'm 55 years old now, so my gender journey has evolved through social media. It has evolved through where I didn't even know that other people existed like myself until I looked at a Sports Illustrated magazine and saw Dr. Renee Richards in one of the covers, and that was in 1976. And that was like the only time I ever heard of someone like myself. And then I didn't hear of anyone like myself until the internet came along. So I had this huge time of my gender journey was internal. There was no external feeding into it other than boys do this and girls do this. And as I evolved through time, I became more aware of myself, and I started trying to understand how I could attack being transgender, because I had learned to hate myself as a transgender child. So I started thinking, well, maybe if I play sports harder, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do A, B, C, or D, maybe if I pray to be a boy, all of those things will happen. And it didn't ever really take effect. All it did was it prolonged the inevitable of that I'm a transgender woman and I damn well better show it to the world or I'm going to die. And luckily I did just that. And now my journey, once I transitioned, I went stealth. And stealth means that I didn't tell people that I was transgender. I didn't know if they knew I was transgender. I didn't know if they didn't know. I did my work day I just let the world think I was cisgender, and I disliked myself so much then that if someone had asked me back then if I was transgender, I would have lied to them. And it was a lot to do with safety. It was a lot to do with holding on to my job. It was fear of reprisal. But all of those things played into my gender and who I am now. And I'm still on a journey as to who I am as Kelly Jenkins. But I've never asked the cisgender person this question. Can you tell me about your gender journey? Is there such a thing as a gender journey with cisgender people? I mean, I honestly don't know, because I'm not cisgender, so I have no experience what that feels like to not have this journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that, you know, we're all on this journey of understanding what gender is. I know that, you know, that there was no talk when I was a kid of trans identities, non-binary identities. And for me, I think particularly as a gay man, it was so wrapped up in my sexual identity, and understanding the dichotomy between sexual identity and gender identity was a journey for me. It's a journey I know a lot of other young people and adults are on. And, you know, I think that one of the biggest like aha moments of my journey, I think, was understanding that gender really is, you know, gender is a social construct. And when I've gone in with even very young kids, and they're able to gather this concept, you know, much earlier than I had to do my, you know, probably my 30s, that there's nothing about my biology that says that I can't walk into work in a dress, right? There's nothing physically preventing me from doing that. And yet is this social construct of gender that says that because I identify as a man, that would be an odd thing to do. And even like, you know, little kids get that, like, yeah, that's silly, you know, like, and so for me, that's been a big part of my journey is understanding, you know, the components of identity that fall in our gender, and the components of identity that do not.
Mm. You know, I'm going to say something that we were talking about in prep as well. And Johnny, this is a real shout out to you. When we were prepping our questions for this particular panel, one of the things that you said to me, Johnny, is I should be answering these same questions about my gender. And I appreciated that, right? Because I do think, Kelly, for lots of people who are cisgender, and I'm going to speak for myself and my own experience, you know, my gender journey for me is now reflective, right? It's about really thinking about what those experiences were. They were not on the forefront for me, like many trans and non-binary folks have articulated and talked about, right? It was not one of the daily thoughts and conversations. I definitely experienced a lot of privilege there. Now, as an adult, and when I do reflection about my gender, do I think more so about little experiences along the way. So I appreciate you asking the question. Yeah, please, Johnny.
I just want to I know we're running short on time. I just want to transition that thought just into what, you know, I'm thinking about allyship, and you know, I'd love to share just two quick thoughts on that, and then be quiet and just listen to my colleagues here on the panel. I think that when I think what you were just talking about, Jason, the sort of privilege that we have, right, of not having to think about gender because our gender identity conforms with that which we were assigned at birth. That's, I think, a big piece of allyship is thinking about when do we relinquish that privilege so that we can provide greater ease and comfort for all. I think about, you know, how do we put ourselves out there? So like even something as simple as like identifying our pronouns, I think they're right there, right? That it's because, you know, most people, almost everyone I meet, assume that my pronouns are what they are because they match the gender expression that I give off into the world. They match my beard, right? And I identify those pronouns because there are lots of people who that is not the case, right? Like what we would assume to be their pronouns, Noah shared this earlier, are not what we would assume them to be. And so they have to, every single time they share their pronouns, come out essentially in that process, right? So thinking about that privilege and putting yourself out there, and and understanding that no matter what we get back in return, even if it's negativity, is a fraction of what people who are not part of the dominant group experience every single day. And then the second piece around allyship that I think around using that privilege is also just understanding that language really matters. It's so important. Some folks may have seen the craziness online with J.K. Rowling recently. There was, which is really upsetting, when someone like J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, as most of you I'm sure are aware, that she got really upset about a headline article that referenced people who menstruate rather than saying women. And it's frustrating with someone with such social capital as she has, especially someone who got that capital from her facility with words, fails to recognize the way in which words can really create barriers or can be used to break them down. So the headline was in reference to, I believe it was COVID-19 and the impact it was having to, the negative impact it was having on people who menstruate. And the headline was written to include people who menstruate who do not identify as women. And it was also just far more accurate. My 94-year-old grandma, we've never had this conversation, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't menstruate anymore. And, that article was not about her. And so J.K. Rowling getting so mad that the article didn't say women, it's not just about being politically correct, it's about being inclusive and it's about being accurate. That article was also about trans and non-binary people who do menstruate, who do not identify as women. So understanding the language is so important, and then just speaking up. That question from Larry earlier about the child who had the teacher who was gendering students. Those of us that have kids that we're pretty sure are cisgendered, and we can't really be sure until much later, beyond fourth grade for sure, we need to speak up and talk about why that language matters, so that it's not always the parents of the trans kids speaking up for the parents of the non-binary kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Johnny, thanks for moving us along too in terms of thinking about allyship. And I wonder if I can pose that as a final question to everyone here, to Noah, Kelly, and Danny, if you can speak a little bit to allyship and what does that look like for you, right? What do the people in your life do that make you feel great about who you are as a human? If any of you, Noah, you're up in just 1 second. If any of you have family that are supportive, can you speak a little bit to sort of allyship among family too and what that looks like? So Noah, go ahead and jump in if you don't mind.
I also wanted to address a question we got in the chat, which was, what is the best way to arrange student seating on the first day of school, say 3 or 4 to a group? And I would say if you don't know the kids, just do it randomly or let them choose their seats. I think it's weird to group kids by gender, as we've talked about previously. And kids should be mixing and mingling and getting to know different people than they usually would. So that's my answer to that. In terms of allyship, as I'm sure you guys have heard, I had one supportive parent, one unsupportive parent. In addition to them, I have a supportive brother and a mostly supportive extended family. And some of the things that make me feel validated are just when people use my pronouns. That's a big one, and correct people when they misgender me. A weird thing that makes me feel validated is just including my gender into everyday conversations. It's not something you have to tiptoe around. For example, I dated someone who texted me once and they were like, hey, what do you call a non-binary person who is a grandparent? And I was like, I don't know, I actually haven't figured that one out. And she was like, it's a grand nah. And I was like, yes, that's a mood. And I've also, my mom is supportive, and she refers to me as her child instead of her daughter, which I really appreciate. And she does that to everyone. This isn't a conditional thing that she does with me and my brother. When she's at work or when she's introducing me to her colleagues, it's always this is my child, Noah. So I find that really helpful. And not to shout out Lex Pride one more time, but she will be coming to the car parade on Sunday. I also invite other people to come to the car parade on Sunday and showing up in those spaces and reading the articles I send her, because although my mom knows, I would say more than the average parent, because she taught race, class, and gender, there was a new learning curve when it came to non-binary stuff. But she did the research, she listened to me, and most importantly, she believed me and trusted me about my own feelings about myself, you know, because I've definitely been told I don't know what I'm feeling, or like you're wrong or whatever, but I didn't get that from my mom, and that was really great.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And, you know, so I've got a non-binary kid as well, Noah, and we use the term kiddo. And so I always refer to my child as kiddo all the darn time. So I love that. All right. So Kelly and Danny, you each have 1 minute to talk about allyship. And what does that mean to you, if you don't mind?
Ready, go.
All right.
So to me, allyship is pretty simple. It's someone that is going to be there for me when they're with me and when they're not with me. In other words, I've had people that have stood up for me in conversations that I wasn't even a part of. They might have been out on the disc golf course. Everybody played disc golf, great sport. I could have been on the disc golf course and they heard something and they stood up for me. Online, I've had friends that have taken metaphorical body blows just to keep me safe. I have friends that reach out to me when they see something negative on the news or they hear something negative and just say, hey, are you okay? I have friends that are just my friends. So I think allyship is really very much a verb. Mm-hmm. It's being there for me when I'm not there and being there for me when I am there, and letting me be my authentic self and celebrating my milestones.
Beautifully said. Thanks, Kelly. Danny, how about yourself?
So I think a big part of allyship to me is when people kind of take some of the weight off of your shoulders. Like Noah mentioned, if you're publicly out and someone misgenders you, it can be really great to have like an ally to correct them, because it gets really tiring if you have to correct people all the time. So that's something that I found is a great thing to do if you're an ally and the person is publicly out, is correcting about pronouns. And then just if you're an ally, you can't be silent when it's convenient to you. Like, you have to kind of, even if it's inconvenient or uncomfortable, always do the things that you would do if it was convenient or comfortable. And yeah, just kind of being a helping hand. And I think that's the most important part of allyship to me.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Beautifully said. Thanks, Danny. You know, I love that both of you are talking about the idea of ally being a verb, right? Being an action, if you will. Many students that I work with talk about, you know, they use the word accomplice, right? As opposed to an ally, right? I need an accomplice, somebody who's in this with me, if you will. So ideally, for those of us who are cisgender, we're going to continue to think about ourselves as accomplices in this really, really important work. So I want to take a moment and appreciate the four of you for sharing your experiences, your thoughts, your guidance and suggestions. And I'm going to take a moment to turn this back to Julie, because I believe that Julie wants to give you some connection information, if you will.
Yeah, I just want to thank all of you as well for giving of your time. And I also want to say that this is not a one-time conversation, that this is a conversation that we need to have ongoing, along with our action plans. And I want to say I love being an accomplice, and I love that that language very much, in the same way that I appreciate being an ally. And so I was trying to copy in the Shack form link for anybody who has questions or feedback, and I'm not able to do that. If you want to email me at jfen@lexingtonma.org, the school address, I'm happy to send that off to you, and you can send any additional questions. And please join Shack if you're interested in being a part of our work and our efforts across the district and in the community. And we thank you for joining us tonight.